The memorandum was stamped confidential, dated May 14, 2023, and buried inside a batch of scanned records uploaded to a public federal archive by mistake. Most people who saw it ignored it because it looked incomplete. The first page was missing, half the names were redacted, and the final paragraph ended mid-sentence. But one line caught investigative journalist Daniel Mercer's attention immediately. All references to Black Hollow, Colorado, shall remain excluded from public mapping databases, under Continuity Directive 17. Daniel had spent 12 years investigating government waste, missing persons cases, and land disputes across the American West. He knew every abandoned mining settlement from Montana to New Mexico. He had never heard of Black Hollow. That alone was strange. The town supposedly sat less than 40 miles from Interstate 70 in the Rocky Mountains. Yet searches through Google Maps, Apple Maps, Bing Maps, OpenStreetMaps, state transportation records, and commercial GIS databases produced nothing. No roads, no landmarks, no historical marker. Nothing. The memorandum listed a population estimate of 612 residents. That number bothered him more than the town itself. Ghost towns existed. Forgotten places existed. But a town with hundreds of residents could not simply disappear from every map in America. 3 days later, he drove west from Denver with a camera, a recorder, and copies of the memorandum. The coordinates hidden in the document led toward a winding mountain road outside the White River National Forest. About 20 miles from the destination, his GPS suddenly recalculated. The route spun for several seconds before directing him onto a highway leading in the opposite direction. He manually entered the coordinates again. Same result. The device refused to acknowledge the location. Assuming it was a software glitch, he switched to a second navigation app. It did exactly the same thing. By sunset, he parked at a gas station in the small town of Silver Creek and asked an elderly clerk if she knew anything about Black Hollow. The woman stopped stocking cigarette cartons and stared at him for several seconds before answering. "You mean Black Ridge?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "Black Hollow." The woman glanced toward the front windows. "Never heard of it." Yet her expression suggested otherwise. As he paid for coffee, a younger employee approached and quietly slipped a folded note into his hand. Daniel waited until he reached the parking lot before opening it. Written in blue ink were 7 words. "Don't ask locals. Follow County Road 19. The road was not marked on any digital map. He found it the next morning, using an old paper atlas purchased from a truck stop. The asphalt narrowed into cracked pavement, then gravel, then a dirt track cutting through dense pine forest. Several miles in, he passed a rusted county sign that had been painted over so many times, the original lettering was impossible to read. His phone lost service. His satellite communicator displayed an error message he had never seen before. At noon, the forest opened, and Daniel nearly drove into a mailbox standing beside the road. Then another, then dozens. A mile later, the town appeared. Black Hollow existed. It was not abandoned. It was alive. Children rode bicycles along sidewalks. Pickup trucks sat outside homes. A grocery store displayed fresh produce. A post office operated from a brick building near the center of town. Everything looked normal, except for one impossible detail. None of it should have been there. According to state records, the area contained only federal wilderness land. Daniel spent the afternoon documenting everything. The post office carried current postage. Utility poles supplied electricity. Residents paid with modern credit cards. The grocery shelves contained products manufactured only weeks earlier. Yet when he asked people about the town's history, conversations became awkward. Most residents offered polite but vague answers. A mechanic claimed his family had lived there for generations but could not name the county. A waitress at the diner said the population was around 600 but seemed confused when asked who served as mayor. Another resident abruptly left after Daniel mentioned maps. By evening, he rented a room above the diner and reviewed his footage. Something else stood out. Every government building displayed American flags and official notices, but the dates felt wrong. Tax announcements referenced legislation from the early 1990s. Election notices listed candidates from decades ago. A framed newspaper hanging inside the diner featured a headline celebrating a local 4th of July festival scheduled for 1994. Daniel initially assumed it was decoration until he noticed the newspaper looked brand new. The next morning he visited the county assessor's office, listed on town signage. The building contained employees, filing cabinets, computers, and current utility records. However, all external communication systems appeared disconnected. Internet browsers displayed local pages hosted on internal servers. Telephone calls never connected outside town limits. When Daniel asked an employee where tax records were sent, she answered matter-of-factly, "Denver Processing Center." There was no such center. He checked. During lunch, he reviewed census data using downloaded federal records stored on his laptop. Black Hollow appeared in population reports every decade. The entries listed residents, housing figures, employment statistics, and tax revenue. Yet the town name existed nowhere else. No maps, no geographic databases, no transportation records. Census reports acknowledged the town's existence while every other government system denied it. That contradiction should have been impossible. The real shot came later that afternoon. Inside the local library, Daniel found archived newspapers covering town events through the 1980s and early 1990s. Then everything stopped. Every publication after September 19, 1994 contained identical front pages. Different dates appeared at the top, but the stories never changed. Same articles, same photographs, same advertisements. Every issue repeated endlessly for nearly 30 years. The librarian noticed his reaction and quietly closed the archive drawer. "You should leave," she said, "before someone notices what you're looking at." Daniel asked who would notice. The woman hesitated. "The people who keep us here." That night, he followed a utility road climbing above town. Near the summit stood a fenced federal facility, absent from every document he had found. The gate displayed no agency name. Security cameras tracked his movement. Through binoculars, he observed communications towers, backup generators, and a parking lot filled with government vehicles bearing current registration tags. Someone was actively funding operations there. Around midnight, headlights emerged from the compound and descended toward town. Daniel photographed 3 black SUVs entering Black Hollow. The vehicles stopped outside homes, selected with deliberate precision. Residents stepped outside carrying folders. No arrests occurred. No arguments. The exchanges resembled routine administrative business. By dawn, the SUVs had vanished. Determined to identify the facility, Daniel returned the next day and hiked through the forest to avoid the main entrance. He discovered a maintenance tunnel hidden beneath a slope behind the compound. Inside were servers, communications equipment, and rows of filing cabinets. Most documents had been removed, but one cabinet remained locked open. It contained resident files, hundreds of them. Each file included photographs, tax records, medical information, employment histories, and annual evaluations. Every folder carried the same designation: continuity subject. Daniel copied as much as he could before hearing voices. He escaped through the tunnel moments before security personnel entered. Back in town, he examined the files. The evaluations disturbed him. Residents were monitored continuously. Reports detailed shopping habits, conversations, family disputes, and travel requests. One note read, "Subject requested relocation outside containment zone. Request denied." Another stated, "Subject attempted unauthorized departure. Reintegration successful." The wording sounded less like public administration and more like livestock management. That evening, Daniel confronted the librarian. She finally agreed to talk. According to her, Black Hollow had once been an ordinary mining town. In 1994, something happened involving a federal research program operating nearby. She did not know specifics because records disappeared overnight. Government officials arrived, closed roads, bought property, and restricted travel. Within months, maps changed. New residents stopped arriving. Existing residents were told participation was temporary. 30 years later, nobody had been allowed to leave permanently. Daniel asked why people stayed. The librarian's answer was simple. Most don't realize they're prisoners. She then showed him a ledger hidden beneath the library floorboards. The entries recorded names of residents who attempted to leave. Every name ended the same way: transferred. No destination, no explanation, just transferred. The final entry was dated 2 weeks earlier. That name belonged to a high school teacher Daniel had interviewed the previous day. The teacher's house now stood empty. No neighbors remembered him. School records had been true. Altered. Photographs disappeared. It was as though the man had never existed. Daniel decided to leave immediately and publish everything. He packed before sunrise and drove toward County Road 19. After 30 minutes, he realized the scenery looked familiar. Another 20 minutes passed. He returned to the town center without ever turning around. He tried a different road. Same result. A logging route ended at the grocery store parking lot. A forest trail emerged behind the post office. Every path somehow looped back. Residents watched from porches as if they had seen this happen before. Then, Daniel noticed something even worse. The population signs entering town listed 612 residents. The sign now read 613. Later that afternoon, a black SUV stopped outside the diner. 2 men in plain clothes approached carrying folders. One smiled politely and asked if he had enjoyed his stay. The folder under the man's arm bore a printed label: Daniel Mercer, continuity subject.